the mother's centered because she went through this embodied experience, but the dad is also in his transformation and also needs support. And there's the biological fact that the more present a man can be with his woman, with his new baby, with his family in that postpartum period, the more his hormonal matrix is altered.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Medicine Stories podcast. It's me, Amber, back after an unexpected break. If you would like a status update on this podcast, our medicine business, my life, you can find that at patreon.com/medicine stories. It's just a 16-minute recording updating my supporters there on Patreon. Thank you so much. Explaining the break and talking about what's coming next. Also on Patreon is a bonus conversation with my guest today, Rachelle Seliga. Today we're talking about the postpartum period. We're talking about fatherhood, motherhood, the forging of families in the fire of the first year. Wow, should I make that the title? It's alliterative, which everyone likes. In the podcast bonus interview with Rachelle, I give her a wellness trends lightning round. So I ask her about 8 wellness trends. I don't want to belittle them completely by calling them trends, but wellness topics to get her quick yes or no. And then we dive a little deeper into, I think, all of them. We talk about German new medicine, astrology, free birth, pro-metabolic, microwaves, fasting, liver gallbladder flushes, and parasite cleanses. I guess microwaves and astrology aren't exactly wellness topics, but anyway, that's there if you want to hear Rachelle's hot takes on all those topics. And yeah, because I've recorded the other Patreon bonus, sort of a life update, I don't really have anything else to say right now. Let's dive into this conversation. I think it's going to be so helpful for so many of you. Rachelle's first appearance on this podcast went super viral, and I can't believe it's been as long as it has. It's been 5+ years, I think, all about revillaging and maternal health being so fundamental to the health of societies and the planet. And every time she talks, it hits me so deeply. It hits all the women I know so deeply. And of course, we cannot be leaving the men and the fathers completely out of this conversation. So let's weave it all together as only Rachelle can and listen to her beautiful words, thoughts developed over 20+ years on these really tender and really important topics of postpartum, motherhood, fatherhood, new babies, new families, the future, you know, the big stuff. Rachelle, I want to tell you that this is my first interview in many, many months. And I wasn't sure when I was going to get back to podcasting. I've been really focused on changing things up, evolving our medicine, Mythic Medicine line of herbal remedies. And I wasn't sure when I was going to get back to podcasting. I knew I would, but I read an email from you. Was it 2 days ago? And I was just like, we need to talk about this. I've always wanted to have Rachelle back. And this feels like an easy way back in to podcasting for me because we're friends. I trust you. I admire you so much. And then yesterday in a group text with 3 other women, one of them sent the replay from your recent workshop and was like, God, I love Rachelle so much. This is so good. You all have to watch it. And I was like, oh, I'm interviewing her tomorrow. And then I watched it this morning, which I didn't even know you had done that. So I was like, oh, thanks, giving me more homework to do before I interview Rachelle. But at the beginning of the call, you and Dan Doty, I think is his name, talk about how you both feel nervous. And, no matter how many times you like hold a space or talk to someone on Zoom, it's going to be recorded for other people to listen to. It is difficult. And it gave me courage to hear you two say that. And let's see, one of you said something so good. I thought I wrote it down here. Oh, to show up as nothing more and nothing less than who I am. So here we are doing that. And thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for those sweet, kind words.
Yeah, I thought I could start. I mean, so you're known for, why don't you tell us what you're known for, actually?
I feel like at this time in my life, what I have been known for mostly, right, is my work around the postpartum time. And to encapsulate that, really what I would call it is physiologic postpartum care. And that's an acknowledgement that all of the world's postpartum traditions are virtually the same because they're based in our postpartum physiology as women. And physiologic postpartum care is the care that our physiology mandates, right? So I have innate postpartum care training, and I work with birth and healthcare practitioners from around the world and teach this methodology. And then they work with families around the world, right? So at this point, there's been thousands of women who have gone through my training, and they're working with thousands of families around the world. And it's beautiful because I can track, right? It's not just like an idea or theory. I can track consciousness shifting. I can track the creation of a new culture just specifically through the women who I'm in contact with who have had these incredibly nourishing, regenerative postpartum experiences, right? And so sometimes that's from the women themselves who are receiving this care. Sometimes it's hearing about it through the innate practitioners who have trained with me, but it is a culture work in action. And so that has been really the focus of my work, like all of my outer world work for 10 years now.
Yeah, we talked about what brought you into that when you were first on the podcast, but that was like 5 years ago or something. Was it just the one time also?
I think so.
Can't believe I haven't had you back. I've ever since then been like, I got to have Rachelle back like repeatedly. She needs to be a rhythmic guest. And I think I might do that more often in the future with the podcast. But man, my youngest just had her 9th birthday. So I'm 9 years away from postpartum, and then I have a 19-year-old, and your daughter just started high school.
She'll be 15 in October.
Oh my gosh. So here we are far away from that time period. And yet I think every mother clearly recalls the tone of her postpartum period. What went right and what went wrong. And so these were the words in your email. First of all, the subject line, postpartum shapes families for generations. I'm like, oh, click. There's no greater crucible than the postpartum time. It is an initiation for all, not a ceremony around a fire, but an initiation that happens in the bedroom, the kitchen, in the dirty laundry, and all the way through every cell of mother, father, baby. I just loved that you had the line in the dirty laundry in there. It isn't a beautiful ceremony or rite of passage around the fire with our whole community and our elders and our mothers and aunties standing there with us in these modern times. You call them the now times. It is messier than that and more confusing than that for most of us. And I appreciate what you're 15 years after you went through your own postpartum period, you're broadening the scope of what you're talking about right now. And that's what really made me want to talk to you again today. How do we bring this more into the whole family, into the male realm, to the fathers? And what does it mean to be initiated into adulthood in this time where we lack the village?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me first just say that. So Dan and I co-wrote that email, right? And Dan Doty, he has been working with men and fathers specifically for about 20 years, right? And I've been working with mothers really for 23 years now. And there's been so many things that have evolved just organically in my life over the past couple of years of reckoning with the fact that again, it's like it's one thing to say like we want to create a new earth and we want to shift consciousness and we want, blah blah blah, but how do you do that, right? And in my experience, like it actually requires some strategy, like how do we do that? And I feel like the work that I've done primarily with women for 23 years has been so powerful. And it feels for me, right, like through my system, through my body and my life now that things have to keep evolving in order for change to come. Like what I've learned is like if I don't evolve, if people around me don't evolve, and then we can't evolve relationally, it kind of just becomes a cesspool, right? So what just organically came forth in my work, this was about 2 years ago now, and it came forth with a man named Thomas Dochin. And him and his wife had taken a class I teach called Physiologic Baby Care. And Thomas does a lot of work with men. And he reached out to me sometime after and said, "Hey, we're making a documentary about men and men's work. Can we interview you?" And I was like, "Well, sure," like it seemed a little strange to me. I'm like, what do I know about that? But I was like, sure. He's like, "We're just interviewing a couple women and we want you to be one of them." And I was like, okay. And really what came from that, I was interviewed, maybe it was like 4 hours. They interviewed me like video. It's like a documentary that's still in the works. And it was such a beautiful experience because it was really, I was telling my story. I was freshly out of my marriage. And it was really having men who are mature men validate so much of what my intuition has tracked over the years, right? Not just in my own personal relationship and my marriage, but what's happening in the collective with men and women, right? And then from that sprang this desire between Thomas and I to do more work together somehow, right? So we talked about it over the past couple of years and kind of got tabled. And one of the things that Thomas told me through our conversation is that the other woman they had interviewed for this documentary is Pat McCabe. Do you know Pat? Pat McCabe is a Dene elder, and he said something. He told me something that she said that really stuck with me. And what it is that, and I may not get this exactly right, but I feel like I can transmit the essence of it. But that the reason that the last world ended was because men and women didn't believe they needed each other anymore. And that this world too will end if men and women can't remember that we need each other. And from the time that I heard that to present, like every time I say it, I get like full body chills. It resonates so deeply as truth for me. And for me, how things work is like I just need homeopathic doses of things, right? I don't even need full stories. I just like, I can get like this little touch and it's like, and I feel this opening inside of me. And something about that created a permanent shift in me, right? And so ever since then, the way that my work has naturally been evolving is we have to bring the women and the men together, right? And I don't know how, it was like, I don't know how that's going to look. I don't know what that means. And so one of the things that came forth first was Thomas. And I put together something called Rites of Reunion, which is an in-person gathering for women and men that we're going to facilitate next year in person again in 2026. And then Dan Doty and I started to work together for motherhood and fatherhood topics like 2 years ago now as well. And then Dan and I came together and we taught together in person this past summer at a festival in Canada. So, all that to say, like what has been unfolding for me and for my work is the importance of the women and the men coming together and the remembering of how we need each other, right? So it's like, yes to desires, okay? But what I've tracked is that desires within this modern culture kind of get this elevated, holy seat, and needs are like dirty and less spiritual, really, right? And so, yes, of course, like men and women, we can say still desire each other at this time, but how do we need each other, right? And in my postpartum work and really in all the things I do, my work is called innate traditions, right? So a lot of times I think there's an assumption because I'm talking about traditions that I'm insinuating that we should go back to how things were, 500 or 1,000 or 12,000 years ago, right? And I don't ever hold that belief system, right? I very much so feel that we're meant to be informed by the past, by traditions of past, by culture of past, but we're at a time where we're creating new and we need to create new in order to survive, right? And so even that means like we need to create, and I don't mean create from a mental level. I mean, we need to be open and receptive to receiving new, to create in that way new ceremonies for this time, new ways of being together in this time that maybe we don't have the imprint or the lived memory for, right? So now that I've gone here, I have no idea actually what your initial question to me was, but I feel like I've been tending to it. But so what Dan and I have landed on, right, is we need to bring men and women together into these conversations that we've all been having separately, right? Because what's happening for so many people on individual or microcosmic levels, like divorces that are, high levels of divorces, or the patterning that's happening between men and women, if that's just the micro for the macro. Like most people I know are in it like that, save a small percentage, right? And so we're like, how can we bring these conversations together? So we're like, let's take this body of work that I've created, right, that has been taught for so long, and bring the men into the conversation, right, led by a man, led by a dad, to hold that pole, and also to challenge the men and push the men where the men need to be pushed. And likewise, me with the women. It's like I know the collective patterning because I'm in connection with hundreds and thousands of women. And so to me, it feels like new ways of relating being born, new spaces being created, new ceremony being forged so that we can actually forge this new living culture that we say that we want.
One of, the many current cultural trends that really disturbs me and that really worries me for my daughter's future is this breakdown in relating between men and women. And, there are so many think pieces that go viral from all these mainstream publications that millions of people are reading that's about how collectively women hate men or men hate women. And like every middle-aged single woman I know cannot find a partner. And I just know more women than men, but I don't know what it's like from the men's perspective. But it's just like, this is new. This is new in human history. People have always been able to hook up and find someone or multiple someones. But there's something deeply broken about relating between men and women right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was relieved to see that you're talking about this. And you're someone who's always speaking with such depth and wisdom on topics, but it's not just about hashing out what's going wrong for you. It's also about like real world solutions. So like where has your thinking evolved in conversation with Dan and with the other people who you've been talking to around this topic? Like what have you realized, or where is your focus going to be as you move forward as far as this is where we are. What do we do?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, we're really in that, right? Because it's an emergent process. The thing that my friend Thomas and I created called Rites of Reunion, we created it. I mean, on the website, we're like, we have no answers. Okay. We're creating this as a space for us to source the answers together. So, like, what I'm interested in at this time in my life, like, yeah, I can stand there and teach, in quotations, how people are used to, like, I stand there and talk and you listen. And I have some answers, sure. And so does everyone else. And what I have been playing with in the past couple of times that I've done live events is what happens when you get groups of people together, right? And you get everyone dropped in, into a grounded, quiet place within, and then you pose a question, and then everyone becomes a channel to source the answer. And so that's like the field that I'm really interested in playing in right now, because when you can get grounded, mature adults together and do this, I feel like we can get the solutions to pretty heinous problems that we're confronting, that, like, I might not arrive to on my own, because we think differently together when we're in a group field. So that said, I mean, just this past summer, when Dan and I taught together live in the flesh right up in Canada, um, one of the things we both landed on as not just a desire, but, like, when you're pulled forth to do something, is the need, the desire for these kind of collective ceremonial spaces, because the collective trauma that we're dealing with is so fucking massive. And we don't have time for everyone to do, like, individual therapy. I mean, again, I'm in connection with so many healthcare practitioners because of the nature of my work. Every healthcare practitioner I know, from naturopathic doctors to mental health care practitioners and like that, is tapped out in the sense of, they can't take any new clients. They don't have space in their schedule, and tapped out because they're exhausted from dealing with everyone's shit, because we're overloaded, right? And so when we talk about, like, big issues, okay, we talk about patriarchy, for example, okay, or we talk about, whatever language we want to give that trauma that women have suffered because of the distorted masculine, okay, for thousands of years. What are we going to do about that? Okay. And so we're like, how can we facilitate spaces where we can address that together? Right. And one of the things that emerged, and again, there's so many threads to this, and this can take us off in another dimension, and we don't have to go there. But as an example, right, we're like, in the United States, 99% of little boys are circumcised at birth. Okay. So they are sexually violated and tortured within 48 hours of coming to this earth. What is the imprint, right, that happens to little boys, with that being one of their first primary experiences of what it means to be human, what it means to be in a male body? Okay. And what if that experience is so much of what leads to sexual distortion and violence and emotional shutdown and, all of the things? And so, how can we address that? And so, can we do like a big ceremony for men in a very contained, clear, clean way, where a healing, where repair can come to that, right? So again, it's not like the answers are solidified, but the question is, the inquiries are. And, as Dan and I were preparing for that class that you mentioned about initiated adulthood, right? It's like, what does make an initiated or a mature adult? And as we felt through it, it's like, part of it is being able to feel our feelings, Okay. Know how we feel, have capacity to be with the wide spectrum of what it means to be human. And the other part of it is being able to take action. Okay, so it's not waiting until we're completely healed in quotation marks, whatever that means. Okay, it's to be constantly engaged with our selfhood, with our healing work, with our self-awareness, and simultaneously taking action. And I don't think we always need to know. We just need to be willing to take a step forward and ask the questions. So that's kind of where all of that work is now. And for the class that Dan and I are teaching, that postpartum class, it's like a preparing for the postpartum time. That is because that's like a very clear, solid container, right? That we can hold, that has a clear, direct path that actually lays down very healthy, life-giving imprinting for a family system from the start.
And that's a powerful place to begin.
Totally.
I'm going to speak to the circumcision piece just because I had just seen this a couple days ago. So the circumcision rate by state, this is ranked from highest to lowest. West Virginia is the highest at 91%. This is as of May 24th, 2025. West Virginia is the highest at 91%. Kentucky's number two at 86%. And then going all the way down, they only have 45 states listed, but Nevada is the least at 10%. California is the fifth least at 23%. So I think it's not as bad as it used to be.
Good.
It is good. I mean, people, I think in like my parents' generation didn't even think about it, right? They didn't even, it's just what you do. And it, to me, it relates to what Dan said in your call together that I watched this morning about how, I mean, everyone really, but little boys, especially from a very young age, are disconnected from their feelings and from themselves. And I hate to use this phrase, but a phrase that has resurfaced in my mind for years over and over is like, why are the men broken?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's, you know, I think it hits most people in like, oh, that's true, but it's also severe and a devastating thing to say and thought to have. And I've been a mother for 19 years now. And so I've been watching my friends who have boys for almost that entire time. I remember the first time I saw a friend post, like, how do I get my son initiated? What am I supposed to do? He's 9. I think he was 9 at the time. He needs something. He needs male elders around him. He needs an initiation process. What do I do? And I was like, oh, wow, that's really something that mothers of boys need to think about in a way that perhaps mothers of girls don't. And I am so interested in this idea that for women and girls, we have our initiations woven into our biology.
Mm-hmm.
The first period, childbirth, mothering, our initiations are just a part of the unfolding of our biology, even more so if we have a child. And men don't have that as much. And so this is why in so many cultures throughout the world, they knew we have to actually initiate these boys. We have to actually give them this ceremony and bring them into their next phase of life as mature adults. Like I read the book Roots earlier this year, Alex Haley's Roots. I had never read it. Incredible. Oh my gosh, the initiation ceremony. I think it's in the 1700s in the African village that, you know, Alex Haley traced his ancestry to were intense and long and truly dangerous. And now boys are playing video games and watching porn and we all know what's happening to the culture. And I don't know what I'm saying either. You asked me earlier, you said you didn't know what question I asked. I don't think I've asked you any questions. I'm also here just rambling and thinking thoughts out loud. But this crucible of postpartum, here is a time, here is a very defined initiation point for both mother and father that we can come in and make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And this focus on bringing fathers into it, because that's never a part of this conversation around postpartum. Like I know my husband, Owen, he looks back and he's like, I wish I had done more skin to skin. I didn't know about it then. We didn't know, what else could we have done in the postpartum period for me and for my bond with my child. And I'm so grateful you're talking about it.
Totally. Yeah. And, I mean, the first year after birth really creates an imprint for the family, right? And so the idea of bringing the dads into this conversation is to give them the tools to really be able to shine, right? Like I just had a call the other day with Innate practitioners, so women who have taken my training and completed certification and who are doing this work in the world, and we had a little bit of a session like what I was describing, where I, painted a picture and I was like, let's all sit in silence together for a minute. And then I'd love for you to share with me like what comes up. Right. And the question was, okay, me and Dan are going to do this thing. What do you feel, through your work on the ground in service to postpartum mothers and families across the planet? What do you feel is most relevant? Right. Because Dan and I have our kind of lists of ideas of what we feel like we need to tend to, but I wanted to also get feedback from them, right? Because we're doing this work together. And like women, we can say this and then we're like, well, is it okay to say this? But then that's what I love about starting to work with men. It's like, yes, 100%, right? And like men need to have a purpose and a way to be able to show up. Okay. And so in the postpartum time, what's currently happening, because men are not clear in how they can show up, there's this distortion that happens where it's like, well, I want to be able to feed the baby too. Okay. And so then you have a mom who starts pumping so that the dad can give the baby a bottle because the dad wants to be involved. If the mom is wanting that, that's a whole other configuration, right? And that's like a different conversation. But like dads want to be involved, but it's like a distorted way of them getting involved because they don't know how else to get involved, right? So the idea is like, how can we communicate to the men that we need them, right? We want them to step up in the postpartum time. Like, they need to have a clear map. And so that's what Dan's going to come in really and do, right? And so through that right knowledge, there's this impotence in men that gets eliminated, right? And to me, to us, it's like restoring the power and the knowledge back into a family system, right? By helping the men to regain their sense of purpose and right role within that, you know?
Yeah, Dan said something. Oh gosh, my notes are so much longer than I thought they were. But about like here, okay, men are disconnected from themselves as boys, and fatherhood offers the best opportunity to come back into wholeness. And that what he aims to do is offer like a job description for what mom and baby needs, with enough bandwidth left over for the father to pay attention to the quote giant fucking initiation that he's going through. It's so easy to forget that it's initiation for the father too.
Right. And this is part of the thing, and like I have talked about this and we will talk about this in class, but like the design right now is women are saying, men, we want you, right? We want you to come into our birth spaces. We want you to be present in the postpartum time, like in unprecedented ways. Has it been like that before on Earth? I don't know. My sense is that yes, in some configuration, but not for a very, very, very long time. Okay. Men, we want you here. And there's no resourcing for men. Then women get pissed at the men for not showing up in the way that they want them to show up. But men don't know how to show up. Okay. And then, as a simple model, and you've probably heard me talk about this, and I will probably talk about this for the entirety of my life, but we all need to have two layers of support, right, as human beings in order to be well. So if we put that into the postpartum time, right, like the baby has the mom and the dad, right? And then the mom can have her husband, but she can't only have her husband, right? She needs a second person at minimum for 2 layers of support. So we're not talking about, we say, yeah, we want to revillage. Yeah, we want to create community, but like we're like building bridges right now to these visions that we all have. Okay. So mom can have her husband and another layer of support in the ideal world. But then we say, okay, great. Who are dad's 2 layers of support? Mom in the postpartum time is not a layer of support. She cannot be a layer of support to her partner. In other times in life, yeah, she can, but like in the first year of postpartum, not really. Okay. So then dad needs 2 layers of support. Most men don't even have one. Right. And a layer of support can be a best friend. It could be, his dad. It could be a therapist, right? There's a lot of different ways for that to get configured. But in order for the men to show up in these ways that, like, I would say the majority of women are desiring their men to show up, the men also need resourcing, right? So when we're talking about the postpartum time, that has to be considered in the configuration of, in quotations, a plan for the postpartum time, right? Because they're also, right, the mother's centered because she went through this embodied experience, but the dad is also in his transformation and also needs support. And there's the biological fact that the more present a man can be with his woman, with his new baby, with his family in that postpartum period, the more his hormonal matrix is altered. Okay. So when we have men leaving the home, 3 days after birth or even 3 weeks after birth and working out of the home 40 to 60 hours a week and coming back, of course, there's going to be a dissonance, right? It's not just an energetic thing, it's that the mom is completely hormonally altered by being with her baby 24 hours a day, right? In the cases that it is like that. And the dad, if he's not in close connection, he doesn't receive that same alteration, right? So it's that closeness, it's that presence that creates that shift in the hormonal matrix of the mom and the dad. And then we have like a coherent biological field then to work within.
Isn't it the case that most separations and divorces happen in the first 2 years after a baby is born?
I've heard that.
Yeah. And to me, anecdotally, that seems true because I have heard dozens and dozens of stories of women I know just having rage toward their partner when they're in their postpartum period because they're not feeling supported enough by him. And then what you're saying about most men don't even have one layer of support is absolutely true and heartbreaking.
Yeah, and it's like another conundrum, right? Because I'm also not suggesting for the women that it's women's jobs in order to create those layers of support for the men, right? Because that's like a whole other collective conundrum in the sense of, okay, here's kind of the overall situation of what's happening for the men. And then we can say, well, whose job is it to fix that? Right. And some people, some women will say, well, that's the men's job because that's the men's conundrum, right? Like we women have been on this other side of patriarchy, and have been oppressed for thousands of years and we're dealing with, and we've dealt with our own shit. Like that's their shit to figure out, right? And, there's a thread of that. That's true. And also, like, what's our participation in this as women? Because we care about the men, we care about our men, and we care about life. And how do we be involved in a way that doesn't perpetuate codependence and that really holds the space for men to step up and, claim their purpose, um, facilitate their own evolution and empowerment, right? And I feel like that's the kind of line that's being walked right now. Uh, And I know that, right, coming out of a 15-year marriage and then seeing these parallel threads through so many relationships on earth, and the parallels are the women are, in general, stepping up and feeling really great and feeling resourced in so many ways because we've been working on that intentionally, and the men are not. And so then when you're in that kind of relational dynamic, what do? Right? You can suggest things, you can inspire, you can facilitate, and then at some point, like that impetus to move forward has to come from within, right? And so for me, part of why I'm really excited about working together with my friend Dan and working together with my friend Thomas is because they're men, they can say shit to the men that will be received in a totally different way than if I say that to men because they're men, right? And so they are calling the men forward as men. And I feel like that's what we need. We need the men who are well, you know, um, to call the men forward.
Yeah, let's talk about this idea of, well, wellness, but emotional maturity, being an actual adult. I think a lot of us look around and go, where are all the grown-ups? It didn't used to feel quite like this. Why is this person in my life like acting like a child all the time? How do we, what, what's the difference between someone who feels and acts like an initiated adult and someone who doesn't? And like how do we, I guess, initiate ourselves if we feel like we were not ever initiated in any way? How do we step up and do it? Okay, and then also, sorry, but I am so interested in this, in the tension between wanting to heal, which is like a very noble intention. And I think every adult I know needs healing on some level. And becoming so self absorbed and navel gazing ourselves into oblivion. And like, I cannot use the phrase healing journey without saying it. Healing journey. I've done it many times on this podcast, or, writing it with like one capital, one small, one uppercase, one lowercase, because it's gotten so ridiculous for so many people. The healing journey has gone, and yet we all need healing. And so where is that line, and what does like becoming an actually emotionally mature adult have to do with it?
That's a great question. I hold that inquiry too. And I also like can hold and feel that tension inside of me, right? And my embodied human experience and track it on the outside. Because to me, right, it's the line between being in an ongoing commitment with ourself for our own healing for the entirety of our life. Because what are we doing here on this planet, right? And also not getting stuck in quotations fixing ourselves, because if we're fixing ourselves, then that means something's inherently wrong with ourselves, and I feel like that's actually the root of the problem of all of the dis-ease, right? So that's how I hold that tension in my own awareness. And also, I guess I would say that, like, at this point in my life, I feel like most things are a paradox on this planet, right? And so, one of the places I feel that we can get stuck in like a healing journey, in our self healing, is like I mentioned before, becoming immobilized and forgetting that and this is the paradox, right? It's like we're here as human beings to evolve and to heal, and that that healing and that evolution is not just for ourselves, it's for the collective. Okay. And I feel like that's forgotten because where like I am in this experience, but any part of me that I am able to integrate and liberate directly feeds into our collective evolution, right? So that's how I hold that line. And to me, as mature adults, we do have to be engaged in our ongoing, we want to call it healing work, we want to call it self-awareness work, we want to call it um, self-reflection and like that. Because if we're not constantly engaged in that way, we can absolutely become narcissistic and we can absolutely lose our humility. And that's something I track, right? When adults aren't engaged in self-awareness and evolution, right? There is a solidification that happens and a lack of humility, because to me, that is what keeps us humble as human beings, right? So as I grow and evolve, it's like I know how much shit I've been through to be how and who I am today, right? And I know that I understand a lot of things, and I also know that I don't understand shit, right? And if I'm not engaged in that level of work, I could think that I figured it all out, right? It's like when people call themselves experts, I'm like, an expert in what? Okay. You might be an expert in like the nano part of the universe that you know about, right? But it's like a very small fraction. Like I'm not an expert in shit, right? And I feel like I can say that because I'm engaged in my self inquiry awareness practice on the daily, right? So to me, it's like a fusion of all that. Again, it's like the self awareness, the self healing work combined with the action, not staying immobilized because of feeling like I need to be fully healed or enlightened or whatever to serve, not being immobilized because there's so much concern about what other people are thinking because of cancel culture, because of villainization, right? And the healing work keeps us humble and keeps us in integrity so that as we're of service in this world, in whatever way we're moved to be, it's from a place of loving humility because we have that in practice with ourselves first. So that's how I hold that.
So, yeah, so not becoming bogged down in our individual, unique healing journeys, but offering it up for the collective, and taking action, not just getting stuck, constantly processing the feelings. Or I think we all know people like that. I know, constantly in process, loving their process, talking about their process for decades and decades, and
Yeah.
they're changing.
Yeah. And you're like, I don't want to fucking process that. You know, like I literally have said that several times in the past. I'm like, I will not take my time to process that. No,
Yeah.
not everything needs to be processed.
No, it's like a boomerang effect, I think, from those of us in middle age from our childhoods where nothing got processed. And
Boom.
we learn how to process. And our kids, I wonder if you notice this with your daughter and her friends, they like speak therapy language fluently, even if they've never been to therapy, because we, as their parents, have made that like the norm in the waters that we swim in.
My daughter's a little bit different. My daughter is like, oh my gosh, mom, she's so does not like resonate with any of that. She is way like she's a more evolved version of me where she's like, no. You know, she will say no to something that I'm kind of wavering about because I'm in process about it. No, right? She just knows. So I feel like I've been able to support her in that because she is very clear in that way.
Mm, good.
But I
Um,
do feel like that part that you named is so important. It's like, yes, not getting bogged down, right? Because I also feel like we're designed to enjoy this life, right? And if we're always in process about our healing shit, how much space is there for us to be a human being and just enjoy? And I can speak this for myself, I mean, gosh, I was like a militant self-healing person in my 20s for sure, right? And it's been a slow unwinding since then, and it's been a dissolution of many relationships, right? That have been built on a certain paradigm and a certain way of relating to life that I'm like, that doesn't work for me anymore, you know? No, I'm totally an imperfect, messy human. And I'm also really aware of my essence and my soul, right? Um, and so to me, there's like a softening, right? It's the parallel. It's like having an ongoing commitment to self, yes, and having fun and enjoying life and being able to touch in with pleasure throughout our days.
And overthinking ourselves does not lend itself to that. Yeah,
Yeah,
this is another like point of tension that I think about a lot because I'm like a lifelong introspective person. I've been introspective for as long as I can remember. I behind me are journal in this closet you can see filled with journals. I still journal. And I love reading my old journals. I'm like so fascinated with who I used to be and what my thought processes used to be. And so extremely introspective. But yeah, again, it's like that can just trip you up so easily and so quickly. And I think that most likely in like ancestral times, for most of human history, when we were living in villages and clans and tribes, that there was not time for introspection. Like it was an action-based life when there was always just so much to do for basic survival. It was an externally focused life, much more so now than is available to us now.
totally. And I feel like as you name that, that to me is why I feel so compelled in this idea of bringing forth ceremony that meets our time, spaces that meet our time specifically, because we so individualize the shit that we're going through. I get lots of emails from lots of women, right, about this experience and that experience. And it's heartbreaking. I mean, it is straight up heartbreaking trauma, horrible stuff. And they're not individual experiences, right? It's like what we're all experiencing as being part of this collective of consciousness, as being part of a human family. And, when I first started doing my postpartum training, for example, I would do one-on-one like consultation mentorship calls with women. And then as the years went on, I was like, this is insane because actually everyone has the same shit going on. And we need to be in group spaces because when we're in group spaces, I feel like we have the potential to take all these things that feel really individual, have it be in this collective form, right? And move it for transformation purposes, right? So that's what I feel excited about participating in right now.
Yeah, and I feel like in general, women are pretty good at that. Obviously, not every woman, and a lot of people are feeling lonely and isolated right now. But, my whole life I've absolutely thrived on like talking with other women, talking with my friends, and seeing where our experiences overlap and realizing we're not alone. And I was so touched by Dan talking about leading men's groups and talking about how like when one man says something that resonates with another man in the group and they actually feel something in community with one another, that it's absolutely life changing. Just one moment for these men that the vast majority of them come up to him afterward and like
Mhm.
that changed their lives. Then even the majority of them want to start doing the work he does and holding these circles for men, because this simple thing that would have just been available to everyone through most of human history is now something we have to seek out and that feels unnatural, especially for men.
Totally. And I mean, to layer on like, okay, well, how did we get here? Because that's always, it's like, how is this that has been so natural for human history? How are we here? Right. And to me, like where I've gotten to, and maybe you've arrived there too, and I've spoken about this before, but what is going on with the men? that it's like this? Why is it such a revolutionary act for men to be around other men expressing? And where I have gotten to as I've held that inquiry is like, well, look at what's happened on the planet, right? And some of us can say, well, it's the impact of the patriarchy, okay? And some women are like, well, we need to reclaim the word patriarchy. When I'm using that word right now, I'm talking about it in the sense of this domination, this distortion of understanding power, right? As power over, and a lot of the harm being facilitated by men over women for hundreds of thousands of years. Okay. Yes, that's been harmful for women. We can say obvious, but it's also been extremely harmful for men. Okay. It's been harmful for men who have watched their women be killed and haven't been able to protect them. It's been harmful for men to be the ones facilitating violence, right? You look at what happens when a man comes back from war. Okay, whether we're talking about past or present. So to me, the way that I see it and map it is that the men are so shut down because they're traumatized, and they're traumatized actually by, again, for lack of better languaging right now, they're traumatized because of how patriarchy has impacted them. So it's like a freeze response. It's a shutdown response over multiple generations, right? And that's what we're collectively dealing with. We want our men to be present. I would say a lot of men who are, waking up, they want to be present. How do you get from like point A to point C when there's like terrain you have to cross in the middle, you know? And that's where we're at, and we're in this time of this bridge between worlds, right? Like the old world going to the new world, and we're in the messy ass middle of figuring out how to create repair to move together in a good way.
I want to go back to your the subject line in your email, because you're not someone who's not going to back up what your clickbait subject line says. Now, I think so much about wellness marketing. I think probably a lot of people do right now, and the way people present themselves, and the space around them. And you just are someone I hold in like the highest level of admiration, who works with the utmost integrity, and I appreciate it so much. So this phrase that made me click on your email: postpartum shapes families for generations. That's not just something that you're saying, it's not empty words. You talk about how lacking sufficient co-regulation from our caregivers, as I think most of us adults did when we were children, is not just an emotional lack, but a physiological lack. Like that really hit me. And, both of my parents are gone now. And it's just so interesting how time and then also death like puts things in perspective. And my mom actually was amazing at emotional co-regulation. But I realized now my dad was awful. He was a mess. And my mom was gone. She worked nights. So there was a lot of time when I was a very vulnerable, tender, young. I mean, I know it started when I was a baby, and I know he just had me crying it out when she was at work. She couldn't handle crying it out. We were too physiologically bonded. But anyway, just that idea of that alone, lacking sufficient co-regulation from our caregivers, being at the very least like a baseline soft trauma, maybe hard trauma for some people, but at the very least that's there. And then how that's not just an emotional lack, but a physiological lack. Now, this is what has always drawn me to your work, is the emphasis on our Homo sapiens physiology when it comes to family life and childbearing and caring for babies.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I mean, it's like we have a very specific design as human beings. And if we don't bow down to it, there are consequences, right? And so to me, I think about it often as the cosmic joke, right? Or that we can say the paradox that we keep talking about human existence. It's like we have free will, Okay. But we also have like a very specific, narrow map we're supposed to follow, and we can choose not to follow it. And that's the free will, except if we don't follow it, there's pretty severe consequences, right? So, like, there's the map at birth, right? And when midwives say things, right, like peace on earth begins with birth, it's because if birth was happening within the container that it's meant to happen by physiologic design, meaning mothers felt safe and protected, and fathers felt safe and protected. And, there was privacy and witnessing and not invasion and all the things. Okay. Even through, let's say, complications arising at birth, because even through complications arising at birth with connected, careful intent, even through complications, you can maintain wellness. Okay. It doesn't mean like there will never be a problem. Okay. No. But how do you maintain wellness even when there's hardship? Okay. And if humans were being born into the world in that way, we would not have the earth that we have right now. Okay. Because babies feel everything about their experience being born, and they have, like, we have a blueprint of what's meant to happen. And when the blueprint's interrupted, there's consequences. And how we were born, even me as a 46-year-old, I still um, tend to on a daily basis. Okay. So just using myself as an example, like I was born through C-section in 1979. My mom did not go into any labor with me. So, like, as my being did not experience contractions, didn't experience the squeeze of going through the birth canal. Okay. And so that affects me on the day-to-day somatically. I'm not saying that, oh, poor me. I'm not saying I'm going to spend my life only in process with that, but I am saying that somatic imprint is there to this day. Okay. So, what happens in bigger levels of things? Okay. What happens? One of the most clear ways that I can talk about it is there's this really beautiful movie about birth imprints, and there was this man talking who's then at like 70 years old, and when he was being born, he was in a hospital and the doctor wasn't there, and he started to, his head started to emerge from his mom's vagina, and a nurse came and pushed him back in and told his mom, no, no, you need to wait until the doctor gets here. And his whole life, he had worked with feelings of not being wanted. And he did all of this birth regression work and realized that that was when that imprint came to be, right? And that's a somatic memory that we carry from birth. So then when we bridge that out into the postpartum time, right, as families are being born, okay, you have the baby being born, you have the mother being born, you have the father being born. It's a birth of the family. Everything that happens within that time is imprinting upon that family, right? So, is there connection? Is there togetherness? Is there bonding and attachment, right? And again, not as energetic principles, but as physiologic principles, in that the baby, in a somatic way, knows and trusts that it is being taken care of and responded to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Okay. Does that father, not in his mind, but by his biology, feel moved to care for that mother baby dyad? Okay. Does that mother feel the capacity to just focus on her baby and tune in because she feels supported and held? She's not tracking, what am I going to eat? And is my home safe? And all of the things, right? And then that imprinting really moves out in our family system, right? And yeah, again, I don't want to paint the picture when I'm talking about this that like these things work only when birth is really beautiful and uninterrupted, or someone has like a beautiful 40-day lying in postpartum experience. These things work no matter what when there's the right support and resourcing. Okay, so an example, there's a woman who's in my postpartum training who came to be in it to be trained as an innate practitioner because she had an innate practitioner for her postpartum care. Her baby was in the NICU, right, the neonatal intensive care unit, for quite a while, 3, 4, 5 weeks after birth. But she did not, and this is not like my perception of it, this is what she told our class. She did not experience her postpartum time as traumatic at all because she felt so taken care of during it. Okay. She felt so resourced by how her partner stepped up and how this innate practitioner was involved. So it's not a traumatic imprint for her. Yeah, it was hard. Okay. But just because things are hard doesn't mean that it's traumatic. Right. Um, so yeah, I would say that a lot of what we tend to now as like the self-healing work, um, whether we're talking about mentally, emotionally, spiritually, or physically, really has to do with those early life imprintings we have, right? Do we feel safe? Do we feel safe in a relationship? Do we feel certain that our needs are going to be met there? And not as questions of our mind, but questions of our bodies. And that impacts us throughout life.
Yeah. So when I read your email a couple days ago, I was like, I saw that you have this class coming up with Dan, and I just thought about the couple of pregnant women I know. I've been saying this summer, I'm like, I've aged out of having pregnant friends.
Um,
Um, but I do know a couple right now, and I was thinking about all the other pregnant women out there and how this information could be so helpful for them and their partner and their future baby and healing the world through supported physiological birth and postpartum times. So I feel motivated to try to get this episode out as soon as I can so that there's enough time for people to sign up for the class. So will you tell us about it, please?
yeah. So Dan Doty and I are going to teach it together, and it's based upon innate postpartum care, the body of work I created 10 years ago. And it's planning for the fourth trimester for mothers and fathers. So the idea is that pregnant mothers come to this class together with their partners. It's a 1 day thing. It's on September 28th at 11 a.m. Pacific. So we'll probably go like 2 hours, take a half an hour break, and then go another 2 hours. And we really want to, no, we are going to distill what we consider to be the most important aspects for women and for men and for relationships in the postpartum time as the container, as the structure for it. And within that, support everyone to make a postpartum care plan, right? So the idea is that the plan is mapped out during pregnancy. So it's set up prior to arriving in the postpartum time, because what's true is when you're in the postpartum time, there's not enough energetic resource to create the kind of structure that we want to help families create. And then we'll follow up with that 4 hour call with a mentorship call just for women, but it will be facilitated by both Dan and I, right? Because I want there to be a general space where other men aren't involved, but Dan can be there to answer questions directly to the women and like that. And then there will be a call just for the men that Dan and I will both be there as well, right? So that they can bring up what's most pertinent for them, but I can serve kind of as a representative of women as a woman to speak directly to them. And then we're giving everyone a bunch of handouts and like that. But the idea is that there is a big problem, right, in terms of how families are arriving to the postpartum period completely unprepared. And there's also a pretty simple resolution to what can be a very big problem for families. It's a map, right? And it's a map based upon our physiologic design. It's not like my opinions or Dan's opinions, right? Of course, we bring like our years of experience into it, but it's let's turn to this blueprint, let's turn to this physiologic design, this map that we've been given, understand it so that we can follow it. So I'm really excited to teach this class for many reasons, because I usually only work with practitioners and not working with moms and families so much. And I'm also really excited to work with Dan and to be working alongside men.
What about people who will not hear this before the 28th?
We're going to keep it up as an evergreen thing, but this will be when we're doing it live. Mm-hmm.
So then they also probably wouldn't have access to those follow-up calls because they
Correct.
would be in the past at that point. Okay. Thank you, Rachelle. Will you tell people where to find you?
You can find my work at innatetraditions.com, and on Instagram land, it's innate traditions.
Would you be willing to record a second thing with me right now that's kind of like a lightning round where I ask you? I've just been thinking about this for the last week. I was like, I'm going to do this with all my guests coming up in the next while. I'm going to ask about 8 somewhat controversial like wellness trends or wellness topics and just get your quick yes or no. And then maybe we can go deeper into a couple of them if we want to.
Sure.
Okay, we'll do that for Patreon.
I'm very curious.
Yeah, I'm curious too, actually, what you're going to say about a couple of them.
Here's what you're going to ask.
Well, okay, you're about to find out.
Okay.